Hey friends, what's up? Phillip here with Points of Phillip, and I'm actually here because, well, there's an interesting kind of rumor, kind of maybe news that, well, we need to talk about. So, today's news is that the Chase Freedom Flex no longer appears to be accepting applications. What's more, some people are not able to actually product change other Chase cards to the Chase Freedom Flex. So it appears that so far, the Chase Freedom Flex appears to no longer be, well, an active card in Chase's lineup. So we're going to get into that, but before we do, I want to ask you guys to like and subscribe. Doing that helps people like you to see the content more, and it also helps me and YouTube know that what I'm doing is helpful for you guys, and that in turn helps more and more people see the content. So thanks so much for doing that. I really appreciate it. Okay, so let's get into the news. The Chase Freedom Flex card is no longer accepting new applications according to the Doctor of Credit, and it no longer is sponsored or featured on Chase's website. Now, this is it's been speculated that the Chase Freedom Flex will be kind of rebranded and kind of a similar card. So that could be some future news down the road. But what we do know now is that essentially if you don't have the Chase Freedom Flex and you're trying to get the Chase Freedom Flex either by applications or product changes, that appears to no longer be the case. Now, Dr. of Credit did mention that this does seem to happen occasionally for no reason, but it's also possible that this card is getting a refresh of some type. And so that is really interesting thing to look into. So I think what we want to do now is I want to talk about what the Chase Freedom Flex is and kind of what it is to the Chase ecosystem as a whole. And we're going to get into that. So before let's do that. So first of all, the Chase Freedom Flex has no annual fee. Now, it does have an intro offer of $200, or it did, and it also had an intro APR of 0% for 15 months if you were approved for that sign-up bonus. So this is an interesting card. So no annual fee. It comes with no APR, which can be really helpful for someone who's either looking to finance a large purchase, or if someone is, say, trying to kind of subsidize maybe some periods where they're going to school and they're not able to work full time and they want to put some expenses on that and then pay it off, like say if they're working over the summer or something like that. So there's a lot of different good options for this. Okay, let's take a look at why the Chase Freedom Flex was so special and why it was important. So the overarching benefit of this card is the fact that it had a 5% rotating categories. Now, this is very similar to how the Discover It card kind of functions, that one has similar rotating 5% cashback categories, and those categories changed. And so what's really kind of confusing about this is they actually announced basically the new current cashback categories through September. So that's, it's still good for the people that have the card, but it's kind of weird that if they are kind of doing something that they would announce that. Maybe you think that they would do it at the quarter, right? Or maybe they're going to keep new people from coming into this card and then maybe announce it or officially launch it, at the end of September when the new quarter categories could be announced, right? So that could be interesting. But they have the 5%. Now for the first quarter for 2025, that included grocery stores, fitness clubs, hair, nails, and spa services, and Norwegian Cruise Line. And for tax season, there was actually a special category that was only in the month of March, and that was tax preparation and insurance. So from January 1st to March 31st, if you use the Chase Freedom Flex for groceries, fitness clubs, spa services, or taxes in the month of March, or for Norwegian Cruise Line, you were getting 5% cash back. Now, so it is cash back, but it also earns you Ultimate Rewards points, which you can redeem for 1 cent per point. However, if you have the Chase Sapphire Preferred or the Chase Sapphire Reserve, you could actually transfer those points out to transfer partners. So it's kind of a double threat in the fact that it's a cashback card. There is no denying that it's a cashback card, but it also earns points, which is kind of interesting and kind of why this card has been such a big deal to a lot of people. Now, in addition to the 5% back on those rotating categories, you also have 5% cash back on any travel booked through Chase. You additionally had 3% back on dining, which is kind of a category that Chase throws on pretty much any card that it looks at. And then you also had 3% back on drugstore purchases. Now, this was actually particularly interesting, especially if you're someone who, say, has a family, maybe kids get sick a lot. Having this card in your wallet can really help boost that cash back when, say, you have to go to CVS and get that, what is it, Tylenol or whatever it is, right? So you also had, I think through March 31st, 2025, there was 5% back on qualifying Lyft services as well, and then 1% back on every other purchase. So this is a pretty interesting card. Now for the second quarter, from April 1st through June 30th, which is, well, today, the date that this is being recorded, that 5% back included Amazon, select streaming service, and then for June, eligible cable, internet, and phone services. Now the next quarter is going to be gas, EV charging, live entertainment, and Instacart. So it seems to me like these categories are interesting, right? There's usually one or two that are very targeted for a specific month, and then there are one or two that are kind of more open-ended, right? So that's an interesting card. Now, let's take a look at where this fits in the Chase ecosystem. So this is a part of what is commonly referred to as the Chase Trifecta, and that has the Chase Freedom Flex, the Chase Freedom Unlimited, which gets 1.5% back on all purchases, in addition to 3% cash back on dining purchases. And it also comes with the Chase Sapphire Preferred. And the Chase Sapphire Preferred is kind of their big dog. It comes with 3% or 3 points per dollar on dining and online grocery and streaming services and a number of other things. And then it also comes with 2% back on general travel and 1% back on everything else. And so that is kind of the Chase Trifecta. So essentially, basically, the Freedom Flex you use for drugstore purchases or for whatever that category is for that quarter, Chase Freedom Unlimited for any catch-all categories, and then you use the Chase Sapphire Preferred for dining or online grocery and kind of anything else, and to use as a transfer partner card. And so this setup, the Chase Trifecta, is $95 in total for annual fees, and that's because the Chase Sapphire Preferred is in fact the only card in this Trifecta that actually has an annual fee. And so this is kind of an interesting thing. And so let's take a look at some other issuers that have, well, similar cards. So the Citibank has a number of cards, and everyone's kind of familiar with the Citi Custom Cash. In fact, I actually have one right here. So this card gets you 5% back on any one category in each month, but you have the power and you can select it. So you actually have the ability to decide by spending, right? So you spend on this card, the category that you spend the most on, you get 5% cash back, which actually comes in the form of Citi Thank You points. So that's very similar to Chase's the Flex, because that comes in the form of Citi points, which you can basically essentially cash out at 1 cent per point. But you can also, if you have the Citi Strata Premier, you can also transfer some of those points out to Citi's transfer partners. And so this is a kind of a comparable card to this. So, basically, essentially, Citi has kind of locked down this card a little bit. It was way easier to, say, get a sign-up bonus for a American Airlines card through Citi, and then once you had the card for a year, transfer it to the Custom Cash, and then you could actually just kind of keep a bunch of these and essentially get 5% back on a wide range of categories for your monthly spending. So Citi has started to cut that down a little bit. Now, there's some other business kind of things that are happening in there, but essentially that's kind of something that's going away. Now, it's important to note that Capital One doesn't have something with a rotating category. However, it is also important to note that Capital One did recently acquire Discover, which does have that kind of category. So this Discover It card comes with 5% cash back on any rotating category, but it only comes with 1% cash back on everything else. And so with Discover, that is straight cash back, and it's cash back that you can actually put either into a statement credit to your card, or you can actually deposit that into a checking account, which is kind of helpful, right? So Capital One doesn't currently have one, but they kind of do through a backdoor method, and we'll see if Capital One kind of melds those in any meaningful capacity. Now, let's take a look at American Express. They don't have anything like that either. In fact, the only card that actually gets 5% back, or 5x, is the Platinum card, and that's on airline purchases and hotel purchases prepaid through the American Express travel portal. There's also it's important to note that they have the American Express Gold Card, which gets you 4 points per dollar on dining and groceries and 3 points per dollar on travel, or airfare rather, specifically, not just general travel, my bad. And for that, you'd have to get the American Express Green Card. So if you did have, the American Express card, if you got all of the things that are in the American Express trifecta, it would be the $150 for the American Express Green Card, the $325 for the American Express Gold Card, and then currently the $695 for the American Express Platinum Card. So that is significantly more expensive than the Chase cards trifecta, right? So that's kind of a big deal. Now, Citi kind of has the same deal where they have the Citi Double Cash, which would make up the catch-all category. So that would replace the Chase Freedom Unlimited. And then they also have the Custom Cash, which we just discussed. And then they also have the Citi Strata Premier. And so that is kind of their their transfer card. And that also has $95 annual fee. So the Citi essentially difference is, or the Citi card trifecta is very similar in price and in features to the Chase trifecta, except the custom cash is a little bit more powerful because you're not asking for someone to tell you what your categories are, and so it's a little bit more reliable and easier to earn those Citi points. So I feel like Chase can go one or two different ways, right? It's very clear that Chase is chasing after American Express. And American Express doesn't have a card like this. So this could be a harbinger of the fact that they're not going to replace this card at all. However, if they are interested in keeping up with what Capital One could be doing and with what Citi is definitely doing right now, then essentially it would be in their best interest to kind of bring this back in a sort of different kind of way, right? They are retooling a lot of cards. They recently completely redid the Chase Sapphire Reserve, and then they added the Chase Sapphire Reserve Business, and it's expected they're going to retool the Chase Freedom or the Chase Sapphire Preferred soon. And well, the Chase Freedom Flex is kind of their oldest card that hasn't seen any sort of revamp, at least recently. And so that is kind of theorized that they could go into two different ways. I kind of feel like they're going to maybe rebrand this card because it is a very well-loved card, and I feel like a lot of people do have it. And there are a lot of reasons to get into it because it's a great gateway drug for people that are trying to get into the travel cards game because they can start earning points in a meaningful capacity without an annual fee. Now, of course, they also can't transfer those points out, but at least they can start earning them while they're getting everything under their belt. So I don't know. What do you think? Is Chase going to be completely discontinuing this kind of a cycling, flexible spending kind of category card? Or do you think that they're going to just kind of retool it, rebrand it, and come back with something maybe more closely aligned with the Sapphire line? I don't know. You tell me in the comments below. I appreciate you for coming out. Thank you so much for listening to this breaking news, and I can't wait to see you guys. Until next time. Bye.